In this edition, we'll take you on a trip down the mighty Mississippi River. We'll see the river as both friend and foe. We'll travel aboard the famous Delta Queen, visit some of the South's most historic landmarks, and find the heart of jazz in New Orleans, and much, much more. Then at the conclusion of our program, I'll return with some tips that'll help you capture the sights you'll find all along the Mississippi in pictures. Now, let's explore one of America's most famous rivers.
This is Legacy Americana, a look at one part of our heritage that helped shape the America of today. This is the Mississippi, a river that at once is the great divider and the great uniter of the North American continent. This is a look at that river and at some of the people who have felt its influence.
The Mississippi River has its beginnings in northern Minnesota in a small lake called Lake Itasca, from which it flows in a small clear rivulet. And as it flows through 2,340 miles on its way to the Gulf, it gathers water from tributaries along the way. It takes water from the Illinois, the Missouri, from the Ohio, the Arkansas, the Yazoo. And as it collects these waters, it grows larger and larger until it gets to be the largest river in the United States by a wide margin and one of the largest in the world.
These waters are the great American flyway. At one time, there were buffalo here, and canopies of carrier pigeons and other wilderness breeds that have since departed into memory. Yet today the waterfowl remain, much as they did a century and a half ago when a French naturalist, John James Audubon, walked these shores and preserved these creatures with his brushes and palette. He too is gone now, but there are others who still find beauty here and come to record it with their cameras and film. Jim Stanfield is one photographer who spent a year making pictures along these waters.
In photographing wildlife, there have been so many beautiful things done, and it's a matter of coming up with something that's altogether new, a fresh approach, a new way of doing it. We're looking at the photographer of today. I think he must have taste, good judgment, a certain personality, ethics, certainly a creative person, someone with talent. I think the pluses of being a photographer today, one of the main things is the variety. There's a certain amount of excitement. There's a certain excitement in the unknown, in the hidden, uncovering some of these hidden subjects and unknown situations. I think photography has changed an awful lot within the last years. I think we're trying to go a little bit deeper into the lives of people, the people that make up, let's say, the Mississippi River or Western Australia or different parts of the country. We want to know a little bit more about them, and I think we're doing it. I think the most important thing for anyone that's going to do some work, photographic work on the Mississippi River, is to get involved as you possibly can, getting as close to the river, living with its people. The involvement with the people, I think, is going to give you the story that you want. They make up the heart and the heartbeat of a story.
Long before those with cameras came to these waters, this was home to the Coppery people. The Sioux were here, and the Dakotas, and the Chippewas, and others who named this Father of the Waters. and left their marks along its banks. In 1541, Hernando de Soto was the first European to explore these waters, but others came more than a century later. There was Father Marquette, and Joliet, and La Salle, and others, missionaries, traders, adventurers, people who came under the spell of the river. Today, the 10 states bordering the Mississippi are home to 40 million people. They are boatmen and farmers, businessmen and miners, and they are commercial fishermen like Ken Sogling, who for 4.5 decades has depended on the river for a way of life.
Well, I've been in this business since 1931. It's the healthiest thing there is. I only worked 3 months in the courthouse. When March came, I just quit, coming back on the river. And my father was ahead of me, and he had his brother was with him. And his brother collapsed, and me being the youngest in the family, why, I came and helped the old man out of work. And so I know what the fishing was before locking dams. It was good then, but I think locking dams have made it much better than we had before.
At last count, there were 8,500 people like Ken on the river, commercial fishermen whose annual catch totals more than 50 million pounds of fish.
All the different kinds that we're allowed to take: carp and buffalo, catfish and sheepheads, or perch they call it also. That's the principal ones. And as you get older, well, you start cutting down to it. I don't do any winter fishing at all anymore because age. Well, it sort of gets commercial fishermen past age and their legs give away on them. That's a known fact because it's hard too, but it's also a thrill. Every day to me it's a thrill because you don't know what you're going to catch.
Those who make their livelihood from the river and its lands live with uncertainty, working with the seasons to feed and clothe the peoples of the world. This is sugarcane country, deep in the southern part of Louisiana, a place where people and machinery labor together to bring in the harvest. Other crops might grow more abundantly, but it was sugarcane that supported the extravagant lifestyle of Creole planters. At first, the sugar was used to produce rum. By 1795, a Frenchman discovered how to granulate sugar from cane juice, and the sugar industry was born. At the beginning of this decade, that industry took 750,000 tons of cane out of Louisiana alone. But sugar cane is not the only crop that grows well along the river. This is a harvest of soybeans, those vegetables high in protein that may well be a food source for the future. From these tiny beans, scientists have created analogs, foods that closely resemble meat in flavor, appearance, and nutritional quality. Once, this harvest was brought in by mules and hand labor. Today, this is work for the combines, those mechanical monsters that shell the beans right in the field. Inside, the beans are retained. The hulls are expelled back onto the land as mulch for next year's crop. These are rich lands, made richer by a restless Mississippi periodically overflowing its banks. There is an old saying that cotton was once king of these silt-laden lands, and there are many people who say it still is. Not long ago, human beings walked these roads picking under a hot sun, dragging a 9-foot sack gradually being filled with seed cotton. A good laborer could pick 200 pounds a day. One machine can pick 27,000 pounds in the same time. And so machinery and chemicals harvest these fields today. All of these people were born and raised here. But when they are gone, there will be no more like them. The young don't want to stay on the farms anymore. Today, the young look for a better way of life in the city. A century and a half ago, they turned to the river and to its new invention, the steamboat.
'Cause the river has its beginnings and northern Minnesota, and there are many people who say it's still is. Not long ago, human beings walked these roads picking under a hot sun, dragging a 9-foot sack gradually being filled with seed cotton. A good laborer could pick 27,000 pounds in the same time. And so machinery and chemicals harvest these fields today. All of these people were born and raised here. But when they are gone, there will be no more like them. The young don't want to stay on the farms anymore. Today, the young look for a better way of life in the city. A century and a half ago, they turned to the river
when it reaches you from somewhere off in the distance, an old riverboat captain once said, a steamboat whistle is the sweetest music ever heard. It was the sound that signaled an era, a time that began in 1811 when Nicholas Roosevelt steamed his side-wheeler from Pittsburgh to New Orleans. Others came quickly to the river, and there began the days of the Natchez and the Robert E. Lee. Epic days when there was a fortune to be made in the transportation of cotton and minerals and grain. Those were the times of the riverboat gamblers and exploding boilers, times when the average steamboat lasted only 3 years on the untamed waters. The Civil War and the growth of the railroads killed that era, and yet the Delta Queen remains, the last authentic steamboat carrying overnight passengers on the river today.
113 is right down the hall.
To the thousands of people who each year board this boat, the Delta Queen is more than transportation. It is an adventure, and it is a unique experience that will last for a lifetime.
333 is all the way up on the front deck on this side. 333.
For many people, there will be only one trip on the Delta Queen. But there are others who came to the river in their youth, fell under its spell, and stayed to spend a lifetime. They were deckhands and mates, and they were people like a former pilot of the Delta Queen, Captain Fred Way.
It wasn't uncommon that a man embarking on a boat at Pittsburgh to go to St. Louis would make out his last will and testament before he left home, and then get down on his shin bones when he did arrive home and thank the good Lord for his safe delivery. And I suppose it wasn't too different than airplanes. Anyhow, the chances of him getting there were good and getting back. But occasionally there were catastrophes. A boiler would blow up, or a snag would come right up through the bottom of the boat, and oftentimes when a snag came up, it was a very awe-inspiring experience, because not only would it come through the hull, but this tree, being upended, would come right up through the decks and knock all the dishes off the dining room table, or even pin a man in his stateroom before things quit happening. And the accommodations were what you'd find in the average home. Maybe not quite as elaborate, but then they were on a par with other forms of transportation. A stateroom consisted of a cubicle about 6 by 8 feet, and it had one electric light in it, and a wiggly mirror that you get in 5 and 10, and an upper and a lower berth, and a what do you call these things? A china bowl and a pitcher so that you could wash and so on, and one of these instruments you put under the bed. And of course we carried a chambermaid, and this was her job every day, was to slush all this stuff. And this was about it. And then there was a sign in there that said that in case of emergency and the boat was going to sink, why, you could take the shutters off the outside doors and float ashore.
In the old days, all the side wheel packet boats and stern wheel packet boats, they were primarily built to carry freight. And they did have passenger cabins. But they didn't cater to passengers as much as they did to freight. However, you could get passage on them, and passage was very reasonable. Very reasonable. You could ride one of those boats as a passenger in those days for less than $1 a day.
Today, people of all ages and races work the river. But to most of them, this is only a passing phase in their lives, a time that is lived once and then gone forever.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard the steamer Delta Queen, and welcome to the Orleans Room this evening. I'm your hostess, Paula Kenny. We'll be traveling on our steam-powered time machine at the rate of about 7 miles an hour for this cruise. We have some very interesting shore stops planned for you, among them Natchez, Vicksburg, and St. Francisville. I'd like to tell you now about some of the activities that we have planned for you on this cruise.
There are walks around the sun deck and kite flying over the old paddle wheel. There are sing-alongs and dance-alongs, but what everyone seems to remember is the music of the Queen's Calliope. Next to the steamboat whistle, this is the sound of the river. A steam piano invented in 1855 by Joshua Stoddard, a New England farmer. This is an instrument of another era, a time when gamblers roamed the riverboats, men with long cigars and short derringers who played to win and took their cards seriously. Now they exist only in memory, replaced by people who come here to relax and enjoy a slow trip into yesterday.
Well, the food was, that was one of their high points, especially on the quality boats. There were boats that fed prunes for dessert, but most of them were pretty good. Of course, they had no refrigeration back in those days, but they carried chickens on the boat, alive. They had chicken coop up on the roof. And on Sunday particularly, which was always a proverbial chicken day, the cook would go up there with a hatchet and feathers would fly, and you'd have chicken dinner. I've often heard it said that all you need is a can of lard and a skillet to be a steamboat cook. And there may be some truth in that. But they deserve a lot of credit because they made all the rolls, all the bread, everything came out of that kitchen. And it was a remarkable art that they could do that. And not only that, they were the source of all information.
Food, of course, was always important, and so were good accommodations. But in early steamboat days, those things were secondary to speed. And so, on a river where there were hundreds of boats for passengers to choose from, the pilots had to prove which were the fastest. This is the annual contest between the Delta Queen and the Belle Louisville, a one-day race held in Louisville, Kentucky. The bands are still here, and the crowds still line the shores. Yet these boats are designed not for speed, but for passenger comfort, and that alone makes this contest different from those of a century ago. Those were the days when records were set. New Orleans to Cairo took 73 hours. St. Louis to St. Paul took 68. Of course, that was before the coming of the towboats, those diesel-fueled monsters that have created a tremendous growth in river traffic today.
Mississippi River has had a phenomenal growth in traffic. It has something in the order of 270 million tons of traffic annually. And it's growing at a very steep rate every year. This amounts to over 500 billion ton miles of freight. The energy consumption by this means of freight is the most economical of any that is used to any great extent in the United States. Far more economical than railroads and much, much greater than trucks.
Jim Gunlock has watched that growth in river traffic. And as a vice president of a towboat company, he thinks that traffic will continue to grow.
I think that the future is an excellent future. I think that the very nature of the operation, the low cost, its inherent safety, its ability to move large volumes of products, move them rather rapidly, all point to the opinion that this industry should continue to grow.
Every year, towboats push more than 270 million tons of products over these waters, moving them north and south through a channel that in all places is at least 9 feet deep. This channel has been carved by the river with the aid of locks and dams, those man-made constructions on the upper Mississippi above Cairo, Illinois. There are 29 of these locks, and taken together, they smooth out the 420-foot rise in the river between Cairo and the upper falls of St. Anthony near St. Paul, Minnesota. On the average, these are mammoth structures, 600 feet long and 110 feet wide, handling millions of gallons of water. They empty and fill by gravity, and they have a very simple purpose.
The lock is no more than a water elevator. The ship goes into the thing, you close the gates on it, you raise the water level in it till it reaches the level of the upstream pool. This is the means of maintaining navigation through reaches that are otherwise shallower. We have no locks in the main river below Cairo. All of the locks are above there. Locks and dams are not flood control measures, they're for navigation. The Mississippi River in flood is an extremely dangerous force with a power that's beyond imagination. There's no way to push this river around. The force of the river is such that anything that it devastates not only is destroyed, but you can't even find where it used to be.
There have been hurricanes here and earthquakes, but for sheer destruction there is little to rival a flood. What once were streets and homes and places of business are now useless structures lying half submerged in a sea of water. The Soil Conservation Service puts the Mississippi's power in other terms. In flood, the Conservation Service says, the Mississippi sweeps away the equivalent of a 40-acre farm every minute. As the river has ravaged man, so man has polluted the river. But there is a new concern for our environment today, and all along these shores there are companies who help keep waste materials out of the Mississippi. Bob Jones is vice president of one of these companies.
We deal with many different types of industrial waste chemicals. Our purpose is to, within the regulatory agency guidelines, is to contain them, destroy them, neutralize these materials so they can then be discharged in a normal plant effluent. The big industries along the river, each and every one has a treatment system of their own. They handle many times the majority of their own waste products. But in the nature of their business, they will create certain materials that are very difficult to treat and would take a large capital expenditure on their part in order to handle, say, a small amount of a very tough material. Whereas we have designed this plant to do exactly that for many different industries. So we're an extension, really, of the industries up and down the river.
More than a place for industries, the lands along these waters are home for a people, and throughout history they have fought to make it a good home. This is Vicksburg, a southern city that more than a century ago surrendered to General Grant and the Union Army. It was here an immigrant people paid the price of freedom as gunboats pounded their town and they learned how different the upper and lower parts of the Mississippi can be. Below here is Natchez, a town of antebellum mansions that were untouched in that terrible Civil War. In the early 1930s, women of the town took an interest in these old homes, and today many have been restored to pre-Civil War condition. Once a year, beginning in early March, there is a pilgrimage here, and people come to Natchez. They find here a city that remembers history only as she chooses to remember it, a time of elegance and beauty, a place where stately mansions seem to deny a world of change. And so down the river to New Orleans. This city is so much a part of the Mississippi that its history is the story of the river itself. In 1718, a Frenchman named Bienville first established a city here, a rough dwelling place of 100 or so houses for 500 inhabitants. In the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson defeated the British here, and nearly half a century later, the Union forces under Admiral Farragut took possession of the city. Today, this is the home for more than 500,000 people. And yet, if there is one sound that captures the flavor of New Orleans, it is that sound called Dixieland, the music these people have given to each other and to the world.
Jazz is just a great thing. Jazz is something that I think that is beautiful to me. Well, there once were roustabout. Roustabout was men that worked on steamboats. And many of these men, when I was a kid, they'll be unloading the ship and they'll be singing old-time blues, such as Steamboat Bill, Casey Jones, My Home in Tennessee, Right Where I Long to Be. They'll be working, while they're working, they'll be singing those old songs. I imagine some of these songs did develop into jazz.
Welcome back from our adventures on the Mississippi. Flowing more than 2,300 miles, the Mississippi will lead you to scores of outstanding locations for picture taking. So before you go, single out the sights and activities that interest you most. In the spirit of the river's own son, Mark Twain, treat yourself to an old-fashioned riverboat ride aboard the Delta Queen. And take pictures that tell a story about the paddle boats that sparked so much of the South's growth and commerce more than a century ago. Set out to capture every aspect of your ride in pictures. Before you board, get some shots that show the whole boat, bow to stern, and take pictures from a variety of different angles to capture the details of the boat's construction. Once your voyage is underway, visit the pilot house and get pictures of the captain at the ship's wheel. Since you'll be shooting in tight quarters, using a wide-angle lens will give you the most flexibility in composing your photos. Spend some time exploring this vintage boat with your camera. Take it all in with pictures. The passengers' cabins, the crew's quarters, and the card room that once hosted the daring breed of riverboat gamblers. And be sure to get some shots of the massive paddle wheel that moves the Delta Queen up and down the Mississippi. All along the Mississippi's banks, you'll find picture-taking opportunities galore. But one gem of the South you'll want to make a special point of visiting is New Orleans. And if you can plan your arrival to coincide with Mardi Gras, you'll find yourself in the midst of one of the world's most lively festivals. Mardi Gras always begins 42 days before Easter, on a day that's referred to as Fat Tuesday. For 6 full days and nights, the city comes alive with colorful parades, costumed revelers, street parties, and music. And since much of the activity happens at night, you'll probably want to come prepared with high-speed film and a flash unit. To get the best results with your flash pictures, be sure to review your instruction manual. Now, there are a few key points to remember when using a flash. First, set the appropriate speed on your camera. On most 35mm cameras, A shutter speed setting of a 60th of a second is required for proper flash synchronization. To get proper flash exposures, be sure to set the controls on your flash to correspond with the speed of the film you're using. And be sure to stay within the recommended flash to subject distance range. Now, for night events such as a Mardi Gras parade, you might want to try some existing light photography. With a high-speed film like Kodak VR 1000, you'll be able to capture the color and excitement of the participants in their natural setting. Thanks for joining us on our trip along the Mississippi. As you make plans to explore it for yourself, I hope you'll use this tape as a tool to help you get the most out of your picture taking. Play it through a few times to familiarize yourself with the various sites you may wish to explore. Use it to get ideas for your own photos. If you see something on this tape that catches your interest, just stop the tape, replay it, and jot down some notes to keep your ideas fresh. They'll be helpful no matter where your travels take you. I hope it won't be long before you'll have a chance to turn your ideas into pictures. And be sure to join us for more travels to scenic places in other editions.
For another 10 million years, this Mississippi will still be here, rambling to a beat of its own, carrying mud and memories, changing and yet remaining the same, as it moves on its great and perpetual journey southward into the sea.
Now you can learn to take better pictures with these video cassettes from Kodak. For the serious amateur, step-by-step approaches to composition, lighting, lenses, filters, and film principles. For more advanced photographers, on-location tips from professionals. And for everyone, the best of Kodak's photo travel films. Over 20 programs available to you now from Kodak, the people who wrote the book on photography.